It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope. From the CBS television news staff, Larry Lasser and Ned Calmer. Our distinguished guest for this evening is the Honorable Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., representative from New York.
The recent decision of the United States Supreme Court outlawing racial segregation in the public schools was hailed by members of the Negro community as democracy's shining hour. But there are those persons who say that prejudice cannot be removed by the enactment of a law. And so we'd like to ask our guest for tonight, Representative Adam Clayton Powell, Jr. of Harlem, whether he thinks that legislation can overcome prejudice.
Absolutely not. Legislation cannot overcome prejudice. Neither can legislation stop reckless driving, crime, or any of the ills of our modern society. But legislation can curb these things that are wrong and improve situations and point the way to a better era and better cooperation and a better society.
Well, speaking of legislation, sir, we heard statements from various state officers like Governor Herman Talmadge of Georgia,
God bless him,
that the Negroes in his state do not want an end to segregation. Now, what do you think about that?
Well, that's one of the great shibboleths that people like Talmadge use. Until a responsible group of Negro people in a community like Atlanta, Georgia, say that they are in favor of segregation, I would discount it completely. Of course, you must realize that here and there are isolated groups of professional educators, teachers, superintendents, so forth, who put their own jobs above the integration of 15 million people in the mainstream of American society. And they are trying to preserve segregation because it would preserve their jobs. But their number is very, very small.
Mr. Powell, how long do you think segregation will take to put into effect?
I mean, how long will integration take?
I beg your pardon?
Yes. I would say that it would take at least a generation to see the results in the South the same as we have in the North.
Well,
of course, the North is not thoroughly integrated.
Oh, what about integration in the public schools themselves, though?
Well,
by law.
I am in favor of integrating the public schools on the basis of about 3 years per year. I don't think that they should all be integrated with one fell swoop September 1st, 1954.
In other words, you mean the first, second, and third classes, or kindergarten, first and second, then?
That's right.
Fourth, fifth, sixth?
It's called almost gradualism. I remember when I proposed this solution last year to the National Education Association, my dear friend Walter White, head of the NAACP, lambasted me for doing it. And then I was very happy to see Thurgood Marshall, the great lawyer that won the case before the Supreme Court, propose an identical solution to the Atlanta Constitution. So I clipped it from the Atlanta Constitution and sent it to Walter White and wrote on the margin, "Them thar's my sentiments, sir."
You mean you start with the small children first?
That's right.
And then let them move on up with their classmates each year?
Take about 4 or 5 years before the whole picture is integrated, and by the time you've reached the 4th or 5th year, you will have children who started in kindergarten graduating from high school, and would make the transition a little easier.
Well, Representative Powell, here in the North, of course, we're far removed from conditions in the South.
Not too far, though.
But what do you think are the basic reasons for the opposition against integration?
Oh, just the ingrained pattern that people have lived according to all their lives. You know, there was a great poet that Hollywood took over, and he lost his greatness, named Samuel Hoffenstein. He died a couple of years ago, and he once had a couplet called, "Come weal, come woe, my status is quo." Well, that's what I mean. There are people that just want to hold on to the good old days, not realizing the good old days are the bad old days.
Well, do you think that many of the people, Representative Powell, who do oppose integration in the schools and elsewhere are really afraid of breaking down social lines that might lead to intermarriage?
Oh, yes. Would you want your daughter to marry a Negro? Well, This is the most integrated town in the United States.
You're talking about New York
New York
now.
City. And I have been minister of the largest Protestant church in this town for 24 years. We marry in our church between 100 and 150 couples per year. I have married 3 interracial couples in 24 years. You see, interracial marriage really has nothing to do with civil rights. It's a question of individual likes or dislikes. And it really is just the last argument used by those who have been confounded by their opposition with counter-arguments.
Mr. Powell, what about the integration process in the armed forces? Has it made much progress?
The integration process in the armed forces has finally come to its end. Our Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, Navy are all integrated. It was my pleasure 3 Saturdays ago to be the guest of Major General Irving, commander of West Point, to review the last unit in the United States Army to be integrated, the 1,802nd Special Regiment.
Representative Powell, that brings me to the political questions arising from the abolition of segregation. Now, I think politicians generally regard the Negro community as democratic, at least ever since President Roosevelt. Do you think that the Negro community may be split now and favor the Republicans because they think that the segregation law was banned by a Supreme Court under the administration of President Eisenhower?
I hope for the good of America that neither Negroes nor whites will place any political overtones around the recent Supreme Court decision. You can say it was Democrat because most of the judges were appointed by Truman and Roosevelt. You can say it was Republican because it happened under Mr. Eisenhower's administration. I think the judicial branch of our government should be removed from any political overtones whatsoever. I will say, however, that due to the personal, moral witness of Dwight D. Eisenhower in the field of civil rights as the head of the executive branch, that a lot of Negroes are going to think twice before they vote this fall. And I think that maybe there will be a reduction of Negro votes in the Democratic column.
You, as a Democrat, are commending the Republican president's...
Well, before I was a Democrat with a large D, I was a Democrat with a small d and always will be. America comes before party. And I'd rather see, regardless of who the executive is or what administration is in power, a decent American for all people than just to see my party win.
Well, on the subject of politics, Representative Powell, I'm sure it's true that the communists have often exploited the causes of minorities. Now, have the communists made much of an inroad into the Negro communities of the country?
I think one of the greatest testimonies to the loyalty of Negro people to the American government has been the fact that they did not follow the Communist Party when they had every reason to be bitter and resentful, and with the communists doing everything they could to exploit their bitterness and resentment. There were never, according to the FBI, more than 1,500 Negro communists in the Harlem community. And may I just say something right now?
Yes.
For all the years, the communists have been saying, we're on your side, we're fighting for the rights of Negro people, we're fighting for equality for Negro people. Now comes the Supreme Court decision giving integration to Negro people, and not a single communist newspaper, from the Pravda in Moscow to the Daily Worker in New York City, has printed a single word concerning this decision of the Supreme Court. This was the greatest blow to communism that has ever been delivered.
No word from Mr. Paul Robeson on that?
Not a word from even Paul Robeson, one of the great fighters, in quotes, for the rights of Negro people.
Well, Representative Powell, now that the Negroes do have the promise of a first-class education in our public schools, what would you say they want in the future?
I would say that the next thing they want is political equality in the South. And then after that, economic equality.
What do you mean by economic equality? The right to
Same
work for
hours, same wages, same conditions, and same unions. You know, right here in New York City, we have segregated unions, you know.
Well, what about the political equality that you enjoy up here in the North? That is satisfactory.
That is satisfactory.
But in the South, you feel that it's impossible?
Oh, it is impossible. In many areas, they use all kinds of tricks to keep Negroes from voting. You know the old story about the Negro who came to vote with a Ph.D. from Harvard, and they gave him a literacy test, and he passed it. And after he passed every test, they finally gave him a Chinese newspaper, said, "What does this say?" And he says, "This says that regardless of what I know, you're not going to let Negroes vote." Well, that's the kind of thing it shows, you see.
Well, Representative Powell, you've been a clergyman, of course, for many years in the Abyssinian Church of Harlem. What would you say about this situation as it exists in the churches? Is there integration there, or is there complete segregation?
Complete segregation. For the first time, we find in America the moral and spiritual leadership of our country in the hands of forces that are non-religious. And it is my humble opinion that unless the churches of America integrate within this generation, that we're going to find a revolt on the part of Negro and white youth coming out of integrated schools against segregated Negro and white churches.
Well, aren't some Catholic churches
Catholic
actually
churches are doing a
integrated?
very good job. Some of them are not integrated, but they're doing a finer job in the South in Protestant churches. And here and there in the North, we find Protestant churches with Negro ministers and so-called Negro churches with white members on their staff.
Well, I'd like to come back to that other question I was asking before about intermarriage between whites and Negroes. Do the leaders of the Negro community favor intermarriage?
Leaders of the Negro community take no position on interracial marriage. We do not propose it. We do not advocate it. We say that this is an individual problem and it is not part of our platform for the racial advancement of Negro people.
Thank you very much, Representative Powell. It's been a great pleasure to have you here tonight.
It's good to be with you, too.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry Lasser and Ned Calmer. Our distinguished guest was the Honorable Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., representative from New York.